Hello everyone. Welcome to our spotlight video on humanizing theories and practices of learning. And so there are a couple different perspectives that we're going to cover in the spotlight video. Number one, probably the largest one, care ethics, which comes from Nell Noddings. Then we have restorative practices, where there is some debate of where it came from, but probably one of the most well-known is Dr. Zare, who's a criminologist, but it also has roots in indigenous populations as well. And then pedagogical wellness, which is something that I stumbled upon this summer and found very important to the work of teachers. And so let's start with Nell Noddings' work for care ethics. And so as you can see at the center of this model, what she suggests is for professional educational practices, it starts with care. Okay, that is at the center of everything she speaks to. It's about caring for students. It's about caring for our colleagues. It's about caring for ourselves. And without that, everything else will fall apart. Now, that's in the center, but then around that are all of those other behaviors that go into teaching and learning. So first of all, as an educator, it is about being responsive. It is about attuning to students, yourself, your colleagues, for what needs to be done to help with the teaching and learning process. Once you are responsive, you take action. And then after that, you have to be critically reflective about, was that helpful? Was it not? What can we continue to do to support children and the work that we do in schools? So what would Nell Noddings say about a bunch of different practices that go on in school settings? So the first one let's think about is standardized testing. What would she say about standardized testing? So she is not against assessment. So assessment is a very important part of the teaching and learning process, but what she is against is how we currently use it in our climate of testing. So how we currently use standardized testing compromises care. She's very clear about that. First of all, teachers might teach to the test, so that takes away really authentic interactions and being responsive to student needs. Testing might be used for labeling, grade retention, or tracking, which she suggests and other research suggests can really harm students. It increases stress in our students, in our colleagues, in ourselves. There is socioeconomic bias that we've seen in many of our standardized tests, so therefore it is an unfair practice and therefore immoral. And it lacks meaningful feedback. So the idea is we use assessment so that you can gain understanding of your students, provide meaningful feedback, and also allow it to guide your instruction and do a better job. And that's not currently how we're using standardized testing. What would Nell Noddings say about removing a student from a class activity? I know I've been guilty of doing this, saying, you know what, I need you to leave the circle right now, or you know what, I need you to take a step away. But what would she say about removing a student from a class activity? Well, she would basically say care ethics emphasize responding to the needs of others in relationships. So if a child is communicating to you through behavior, if you're doing a whole group thing and you have decided, this is being really disruptive, that is a form of communication that you are not addressing in your relationship with that child, nor are you addressing it in the relationship to others. So teachers need to model care and engage in dialogue about learning and behaviors. So not being punitive, not punishing a student, not removing them, but engaging in a dialogue. Now there can be consequences, there can be redirection, but you really have to center that relationship with the child and that child's relationship with the classroom. What would Nell Noddings say about a scripted curriculum? So being told, hey, this is what you teach, this is how you teach it, this is going to be delivery on this day and in this way. Well, she would say care ethics and a scripted curriculum are incompatible. They do not work together because care ethics is based on relationships and responding to others' needs, and a scripted teaching system is prescriptive. It's assuming what children need on a given day and a given grade level. What she would say is, no, you have to start with that relationship piece, caring for your students, figuring out what they need, being responsive, and then being critically reflective. Her work very much overlaps with restorative practices. And so I know many of you have learned about restorative practices in your work, but it's really a teaching and learning approach that aims to create a safe and supportive school environment by building relationships. So much like Nell Noddings, relationships at the center of it. Teaching interpersonal skills, repairing harm. Okay, so those are the three pieces. And restorative practices theoretically can help reduce the need for punitive responses and can improve school culture, therefore supporting a more effective learning environment. Really, the theoretical underpinning here is that people are more likely to make positive changes when those in authority work with them rather than for them or even in some cases against them. And again, as I mentioned, there are roots in Indigenous communities, especially with many of the circles that are involved in this process. And so with restorative practices, there's an 80-20 rule. So the idea is that 80% of our efforts as educators or administrators, or I guess as parents as well, should be proactive. Okay, we should be about teaching skills, about creating community, and only 20% should be responsive. If you find that 80% of your day is responding, then you need to do more work. Or theoretically, this approach says you need to do more proactive work. It also suggests that anyone who does not feel like they are part of the community will spend the rest of the year burning it down. And I really love the way this is worded. If you think about this, if classroom is a community, and again, it's about creating kind of this bond, this connection, focusing on relationships, being inclusive. So if someone feels like they're not part of this, they're going to work very hard on breaking down that community in the community in the classroom. And so we have to think about how can we make sure everyone feels like they're part of the community. And we do this. A lot of this proactive work is in circles. So I know a lot of you might use different circles. Circles are magical. I love them. I use them even with my college students. We start every class in a circle. And we talk about that is that there's no beginning and end. It reduces the hierarchy. No one's really in charge, right? We're all in this together. Everyone has a chance to share. It's very democratic. Everyone can have a voice there. And everyone can see each other, right? And that idea of bringing people together and really forming this circle that doesn't have a beginning or end, is not broken, and you're working on something together. Now, again, 20% is about repairing harm. So there are going to be things that happen in your classroom community or in a school or however you're working with kids that will need to be addressed because someone has caused harm in some way. Instead of how we typically used to do it of like, you need to say sorry for that person or you need to be removed from this group. Instead, there is accountability and you have to really work inductively with that student. So first of all, they need to identify what happened, okay? Maybe they were showing bullying behaviors, or maybe they stole something from someone, maybe they cheated. And then getting into what were you thinking and feeling at the time. Sometimes this makes students aware of what they weren't even aware of in the moment, but also helps you understand where they're coming from, who was affected and how. So they have to really name who was impacted by this. And what do you think you need to do to make it right? I will say the other day, my daughter came home and she just started crying. She's like, Mom, I got yelled at by a teacher because out in the playground, I was moving bricks with some friends because we wanted to use the bricks to create this house and we were going to play house. And I got yelled at and I'm really sorry. I love my daughter because she tells on herself. So I thought about this, like, how do I handle this situation? So I was like, first of all, you need to further explain to me what happened. Okay. Then you need to tell me, okay, what were you thinking and feeling at the time? And she said, we just wanted to have fun and play with it. And I'm like, did you know what you were doing was maybe against the rules or wrong? And she's like, no one ever told us we couldn't. I'm like, okay, but did you know? And she's like, I think I knew deep down, right? So bringing that to light. Who was affected and how? She had a hard time figuring this out. She was like, well, the teacher that got mad. I'm like, is it the teacher who got mad or is it the person who's in charge of taking care of that whole playground? And this is at Colleen Hoos where my daughter is. So it's this beautiful natural playground and it takes a lot of work to keep everything in order. I'm like, first of all, someone's job is already hard and now you've potentially made it harder if you're moving things around you're not supposed to. Teacher had to take time out of their day. And you also, I found out later, left the scene of the crime and let your friends put some of that stuff back before it was complete. So you have harmed someone who maintains the playground, you've harmed a teacher, and you've harmed your friends. So what do you think you need to do to make it right? And this was hard too. I said, I think we need to go back to the school and I think we need to make sure the bricks are where they are and help out your friends in any way that you might need to. And so we got in the car and we went back and she found that the bricks still needed to be replaced where they are. She replaced those and she wrote an apology letter to the teacher. And that would be the restorative practice for repairing harm, rather than just saying, I'm sorry, or me saying, you don't get screen time tonight, a very different process. Pedagogical wellness is another perspective. And I love this because it really just thinks about the wellness of ourselves and the wellness of our students. And it's about integrating evidence-based teaching and wellness strategies into the educational space to promote both student and instructor well-being. We know that we need both parties to be well for this kind of relationship and for learning to work. This approach helps foster space for creating a culture of mutual care, compassion, and respect among instructors and students. Okay, my worst days as a teacher were when I was hungry, when I was stressed, when I was tired, right? Those are usually the worst days for my students too, right? So if we can boost out the wellness, we're going to have a better day. What this might look like for students, so you're teaching and working with different age groups, but for students, it can be as early, being proactive, sending out a welcome letter, setting the tone for the year, letting them know you're so excited to get to know them, sharing a little bit about yourself, but starting the year on a positive note. Rethinking high stakes testing. Okay, if it's mandated in your classroom, how are you going to talk about it? How are you going to give grace to students when they are struggling with it? If you're in middle school and high school where testing is maybe a little bit takes a bigger space, how are you going to talk about that? Or do you have to use, testing in the way you currently are? So rethink that kind of high stakes testing. Assess the workload and timing of the workload, right? When are you piling it on for students? When are their lives already busy? Share about and connect students with resources. So finding out what's in the community, what can help students be well, what can help families be well, and share those resources. So check in with students. Like I remember, every so often during the semester, it's like, how are you, right? What's going on? You can learn a lot and that can help you be responsive. Wellness for teachers, so important, and shouldn't just be one more task, but just should be our way of being. First of all, be kind to yourself, set manageable deadlines for yourself, whether that means completing a task, planning for something, getting grades done, but just be practical and make it manageable so that you are not burning yourself out. Also, incorporate assignments and activities that require less grading and feedback. Again, I think sometimes we can just work smarter, not harder about these things. And especially doing it in ways like, are the students going to be able to use this for something meaningful? How much is enough, right? And not really kind of, making it harder on yourself than it needs to be. Financial wellness. So I know myself, I spent a lot of money as a teacher. When I was in an elementary classroom, I spent a disgusting amount of my own money on my classroom. That can really drain your financial wellness, which impacts your overall well-being. So ask for donations, borrow things from people, make choices that are not as expensive so that you can support that financial wellness. Set email boundaries. I really don't check email at night. After 4 p.m., nothing is that much of an emergency. I can get to it in the morning, but figuring out what are your boundaries for emails, for communication. Also find your buddies. You need your social network inside and outside of school. Have your educator friends, but also have people who have no idea what you're talking about, and that when you're with them, you're not talking shop all the time. So find those people inside and outside. So humanizing theories in general are, first of all, based on the idea that people should be treated with respect, and that their humanity should be affirmed. I feel like this sounds so basic, but we have ignored it so long in education. So therefore, it also involves creating an inclusive and equitable learning environment for students. And this can be done by really emphasizing empathy, awareness, and presence so we can attune to our student needs. Thanks for joining me.